career fulfillment, more relationship fulfillment, better sex, better friendships, better creative projects, better community, more traditional cultures that really revere women, helping them to reframe it as a spiritual initiation into what can be the most impactful, healthy, powerful time of your life.
Today's guest is Vanessa Nixon, a traditional naturopath, CEO of the natural cosmetic company Natural Look Mineral Makeup, and professional belly dancer. Vanessa helps empower women to reduce menopausal symptoms using natural methods and learn how to make this the most impactful phase of their lives while feeling healthy, vibrant, and focused. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here today.
What is one of the most courageous things you've done?
I think there's a couple of courageous things that I've done in my life. Probably the first was when I was giving birth to my children. I have 3 adult daughters. I really wanted to educate myself and so that I could be in a state where I could just really trust my body to do what it's naturally meant to do during pregnancy and birth. So I just really spent a lot of time going within and preparing. It had 3 natural births. That my second and third daughters were quite large babies. They were 10-pounders. At home, trusting my body to know, trusting my intuition. I think that especially in this day and age that, it's a really courageous thing to do when we're conditioned from birth to put the responsibility of our health and well-being onto other people, onto medical practitioners or onto parents or other people. So I think that took some courage, at least I feel it did on my part, to be able to just tap into my intuition and know that I knew what was best for my body and what was best for my babies. And then I think the other thing that I've done that has been really courageous lately is I was divorced after 20 years of marriage. Just the decision to start my life over again, be on my own, to restart my career after 20 years of raising children, and move to a new town and buy a house on my own for the first time. All of those things were a little bit scary for me.
Yes.
And then deciding to date for the first time as a 50-year-old menopausal woman. All of those changes happened at the same time. Parts of those were quite scary and frightening at times. But again, just trusting that I knew what I needed to do in order to move forward in my life and, trust that I would be taken care of and that I would make the best decisions for myself. Took a lot of courage.
Yes, definitely. And like you say, they are huge, courageous steps and absolutely scary. I mean, some of them can be scary the first time around and when you're a lot younger. What is a traditional naturopath for anyone that's listening and doesn't know?
Absolutely, yes. It can be a little confusing. So in the United States, there are 2 different types of naturopaths. And naturopaths are basically healthcare providers that use natural modalities. And there are 2 different types of naturopaths. There are naturopathic physicians, and then there are traditional naturopaths. Naturopathic physicians have much more of a medicalized education. It's basically medical school with a focus on disease and pathology, natural modalities thrown in. Whereas traditional naturopaths, their education has been what it's been for thousands of years, which, before the mainstream medical model developed in the last, 150 years. So it's basically a focus on health instead of disease. It's a focus on how do you create and maintain a healthy lifestyle. The entire education is on different modalities of coming to wellness so that you have a really holistic view that's not compartmentalized, but that looks at the entire being from physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual.
Love it.
And, from nutrition to herbal medicine to homeopathy, flower essences, energy medicine, various modalities that kind of allow you to look at the whole picture from different perspectives.
And I think a lot of people use traditional naturopaths anyway because they want a natural process. A lot of people are stepping away from traditional. I mean, medicine has got its place. I'll be the first to put my hand up and say that. But if you can, a lot of people are trying alternatives these days, and a lot of them work, which is fantastic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And I agree that conventional medicine, the conventional healthcare system has a lot to offer, especially in, accidents. If you've been in a car accident, I would say, don't come see me first, go to the
Yes.
ER. And, if you need surgery, if you need what's called heroic healthcare in those really severe situations, then conventional medicine is superb. But if you're dealing with chronic illness, if you're trying to prevent disease, if you're trying to just create health, if you've gone through the conventional healthcare system and haven't gotten the results, those are all things that a more natural approach is really well suited to.
So what took you on your journey of being a traditional naturopath? Did it happen naturally? Did it fall into place? Or was it your experiences?
It was my experiences, actually. My mother was a nurse.
Okay.
And so growing up, I was pretty deeply entrenched in the conventional medical model. I didn't know that there were any alternatives. I had never heard of herbal medicine, definitely hadn't heard of homeopathy. And as far as nutrition goes, I had no idea that what you ate actually had an effect on your health. Especially back then when my mother's generation was growing up and going to medical school or nursing school as she did, there was no education on nutrition. I grew up not eating the best diet. I had a lot of junk food, a lot of packaged processed foods. And by the time that I was a teenager, I was catching every cold that came around.
Ooh.
And by the time I was 14 or 15, every time I got a cold, it would go down into my chest and it would turn into bronchitis. I became chronically ill with bronchitis for about 6 or 7 years. And when I say chronically ill, that means, it would come down with a cold, it would turn into bronchitis. It would take 6 or 8 weeks to recuperate, and then I'd come down with the next cold. And so I was always ill. There was very little time in my late teens that I was actually well. It wasn't until my early 20s when a friend of mine noticed that by that time I was on antibiotics every day. I was prescribed daily antibiotics.
Wow.
And had been on them for a couple of years. And of course, my health was, spiraling downward. But a friend of mine noticed that this was what was going on. And he asked me why I was taking so many antibiotics. And I told him the story, and he asked me a question that nobody in 6 or 7 years had asked me. He said, "Is it helping?"
Absolutely. Classic, isn't it?
It is. It was like that simple question. And I hadn't even asked myself that question. Because I didn't know that there was any alternative. I was just doing what I was told to do. And I stopped to think about it. I realized, well, no, it's actually not helping. And that question spurred other questions in my mind that I had also never contemplated. Like, well, if it's not helping, then is there something else that would help?
Yes, definitely.
I had never considered the possibility, are there options? And so it just opened my mind to possibilities. That same friend said, well, when I get sick, I go and see an herbalist, and I'd be happy to introduce you if you like. So sure enough, within a week or two, I was sick again. I went to see this herbalist who gave me an herbal formula for respiratory illness. And I was well within 2 weeks.
Wow.
That had never happened before.
Gosh.
And I was astonished. I was hooked. At that point, I just needed to know everything that there was to know about herbal medicine, where it came from, why it worked, and how I could use it to get better. Because by that time, I didn't even remember what it was like to feel healthy. It was a lifeline for me.
Yes.
And so immediately, it was like a sponge, just soaking up everything that I could about herbal medicine. And I enrolled in a program with a very well-known herbalist in my area at the time. Then that study led to the study of nutrition. And then a few years later, the study of homeopathy. And a few years after that, then I decided to get my diploma as a traditional naturopath, just so that I could have a whole range of modalities to draw from. One of the reasons that I really continued on this path was because not only did I want to be healthy, but by that time I was starting a family, and I wanted the confidence to know that I could take care of my family's health.
Yes.
That I knew what to do whenever situations would arise, as they do when you have children. And it wasn't until later that I actually started working with other people, with clients, but mainly it was just, I wanted to know how to keep myself and my family and friends healthy without having to depend on other people. Being able, again, to trust in your own inner wisdom and develop that inner healer that we all have through these natural modalities that work so well with the body. Very few, if any, potential of side effects.
God, that's amazing. Isn't it just, that's really fantastic, and I'm so pleased. Many women in midlife start experiencing symptoms such as hot flushes, brain fog, insomnia, weight gain, and intimacy issues that keep them from living their best lives. What would you suggest for them? See, there's the menopause kicking in, and a lot of these things can cross over with that, but they can be affected on their own.
Absolutely. In the last couple of years, just went through menopause myself. I'm now postmenopausal. And so what I found was that even though by the time I was going through perimenopause and into menopause, I had about 30 years of having worked on my health through the whole journey that I just described. So I came into this phase of life being very healthy, having a really high level of health and knowledge and education, and still it took me by surprise.
Oh, wow.
It's funny, and I feel a little bit vulnerable sharing that, but that's very common. For women who are very educated about this phase of life to still kind of not recognize when you are in it. For me, it started intense emotional periods. Yeah. And I have always been empathic. So I've always had a lot of emotions, and I have lots of tools to deal with that. I've always been a crier. As one of my clients and friends says, I have the gift of tears. And
I love it.
But, by this time in my life, I have the tools, to understand those things and to deal with them in healthy ways. But I found myself having just really intense either sadness or anger or frustration over the tiniest of things. And it really took me by surprise. And of course, when you're in that, you're not in the frame of mind where you can go, I wonder if this is perimenopause,
Rational explanation.
Right, exactly. And then periods started changing. They had always been very regular, and they started to become cycles started to become longer, and my periods heavier. And it wasn't for a few months
Mm-hmm.
of those changes happening that I finally was able to kind of step back and go, wait a minute, I know what's going on. And then be able to address it. And so what I realized is that if it takes me by surprise, then, imagine what it's like for women who don't have the education or who
Mm.
haven't spent so many years working on their health and who don't have the tools that I have. That's one of the reasons that I decided that I really wanted to focus on supporting women in this area, because when I look back, think about what helped me the most,
Uh-huh.
it was not only the tools, the natural tools that I had, but it was the support that I had from the women that I had, cultivated
Mm.
friendships with at the time, and my mentors and the women around me who not gave me support necessarily specifically for any health issues or menopause in particular, but just
Mm-hmm.
support for me and my life and all of the things that I was going through at that time, because most women find that they are going through a lot of things in their life around that time of menopause. Things are shifting, whether relationships are ending or beginning, or children are going off on their own, going to college, you're an empty nester for the first time, or maybe you're changing careers, maybe you're retiring or starting a new career
Yeah.
or projects. But this is the time of life where things shift,
Mm-hmm.
things change, and not only in your body, but externally. And we need support. And
Yes, definitely.
unfortunately, in our culture these days, there just isn't a lot of support around menopause. It's still kind of a taboo subject. And so we don't know what to expect. We don't know to expect all of these shifts and changes to be happening. And so having the support is really critical. That's the number one thing that I think women need at this time in life, is to make sure that they have a strong support system.
For sure. I mean, here in the UK, currently, it's a very hot topic. So this is very timely for my listeners. It's on the
Mm,
television, radio, it's just everywhere. And like you say, the support network is absolutely huge. You need that help, someone that understands you or someone you can lean on at least. Just having someone there to talk about, cry, whatever the emotion is you're going through.
Yeah, and I'm so happy to hear that it is starting to be talked about these days,
Yes,
especially in the
definitely.
UK. It's not so much here in the US yet,
Mm-hmm.
but it's starting. In the last 10 years or so, people have started to talk about it and focus on it and realize that it deserves our attention. It deserves our support. Centuries and centuries ago, we had the
Mm-hmm.
support of our villages. The elders would prepare us for going through
Mm-hmm.
this. And we had that built in support network. A couple of centuries now, we haven't had that. And so I
Mm.
think a lot of women do still feel like they're going through these things alone.
Yes,
And
and it's interesting you say that because it's like a initiation. So how is the menopause an initiation?
yes, I love helping to empower women through this
Mm-hmm.
time by helping them to reframe it as a spiritual initiation into
Mm-hmm.
what can be the most impactful, healthy, powerful time of your life. And I think that is because it's such a time of change and shift. All of these things are happening in our bodies and also in our lives externally, to bring up the things that we haven't been able to look at in the past within us.
Mm-hmm.
This is often the first time of a woman's life where she can really focus on herself, because
Definitely.
many women have
Mm-hmm.
spent, you know, 20 or 30 years focusing on their families, on their children, maybe on aging parents, on their careers. and they haven't really taken the time to focus on themselves and what it is they are really passionate about, what their true gifts really are to bring out into the world. And I believe menopause is that time to really look at, like, what are those dark places, those shadows that you haven't delved into and cleared out that have been holding you back? Where are the places in your life that you need to kind of excavate a little bit and shine some light on? And what are the things you need to change so that you can really bring out your best self, your gifts and your wisdom and your passions out into the world? And I find that so many women, when they do take this opportunity to step into this initiation fully, they are able to create new projects, new businesses, new relationships, new collaborations that really make a difference, not only in their lives, but in the lives of other people, especially other women.
Yeah, it's definitely empowering time. Why is reframing their concept of menopause important for women?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe it's because we have been in a patriarchal culture for so long that, number one, we don't have the support, as I said.
Yes.
Number two, we're conditioned from the time we're very young to believe that menopause is basically, it marks the end of our productive life because it marks the end of our reproductive phase of life. Women are still in some ways thought of as commodities. You know, we're here to be able to birth children.
Yes.
And when we can no longer reproduce, what are we good for? You know, we're conditioned with that underlying assumption that once we can't reproduce anymore, then that's kind of the end for us. There are three main myths or misconceptions that I see within our society, and that most women feel, even if they don't believe it, they still kind of feel that. The number one myth is that menopause equals death.
Gosh.
And that's because it's the death of our reproductive phase, but also, you know, 100 years ago, the average life expectancy for a woman in the US was 53 years old.
Wow, didn't realize.
And 200 years ago, it was 35.
Gosh.
So really, a lot of women didn't even make it to menopause. And if you did, you could assume you'd lived a long life and you were ready to move on. And so in a way, in centuries past, menopause did equal death. And I think that we still have that ancestral memory within us. And so we need to reframe that with more accurate contemporary statistics. You know, these days in most westernized countries anyway, the average life expectancy for a woman is in her early to mid 80s.
Yes, definitely.
It's almost tripled from 200 years ago. And the centenarian population, the population that lives to be at least 100 years old, is the fastest growing segment of the population, and 80% of them are women. So we can expect to not only live more years after menopause than before, but more decades. You know, we have decades and decades after menopause that we can be living healthy, full, productive lives. And so that's the first reframe that I think women need to make. They need to look at that misconception and say, yes, it's there. I have felt that, but it's no longer true. It's not accurate. The second myth that I see is that our medical professions have framed menopause as a disease.
Gosh.
It's a deficiency disease. We're deficient in hormones after menopause. So that then needs treatment, it needs drugs, it needs surgery. It's a whole host of things our medical world tells us we're going to need when we hit menopause, because it's a state of illness. Frame that. by letting women know this is not a disease. It is completely normal and natural. And we're not supposed to have the same level of reproductive hormones after menopause because those hormones were at a high level so that we could have the potential of having children, of reproducing. But once that phase is over, we don't need high levels of those hormones. So we're not deficient. We're just transitioning to a different level of normal and natural. One of the reasons that this time of life is so potent because we don't bleed anymore. And there are many cultures that really believe that there's a lot of power in our menstrual cycle. And also when we stop having a menstrual cycle and we no longer lose that blood, we retain that power. And then we have that creative energy to bring it out in different ways. We can no longer birth children, but we can birth other ways. We still have that same creative life force energy.
Love that.
And so I think that's a wonderful way to reframe that. And then the third myth that I see is that, well, it's all downhill after menopause. Life is never going to be the same. And I like to say, well, yes, you're right. Your life is never going to be the same, but that doesn't mean that it's downhill. In fact,
it could be better.
It could be better. And so many women are experiencing that their lives are better after menopause. So many women are experiencing more career fulfillment, more relationship fulfillment, better sex, better friendships, better creative projects, better community. And so, there are some more traditional cultures that really revere women who have gone through menopause for their wisdom and for their creativity. In those cultures, women actually look forward to the day that they become menopausal and postmenopausal. They look forward to that phase in life because they know that that's the most impactful, the most powerful phase of life. I think that is a wonderful way to reframe that particular misconception, is that, yes, things will change and it can be the best phase, the best chapter of your life yet.
How can using food as a medicine help women navigate the change of midlife?
Yeah, that is, again, I think that's probably the second or third most important key that I feel for women during midlife. The first one, as we mentioned earlier, was support. That using food as medicine is probably the second or third most important key. And that is because, it goes back to that really simple cliche that we are what we eat. And I know that we kind of dismiss that as, being too simple, but it really is true. If we want to make this chapter of our lives the most healthy and powerful and impactful, then we need to do that by what we're putting into our bodies. Definitely. If our bodies are going to support us to, live to our mid-80s, live to 100 and beyond, which we have the potential to do, then we need to support our bodies so that it can support us. And again, this kind of goes back to what I was speaking about earlier about having, tapping into your intuition and that inner healer. In, generations past, and in some cultures still, every woman knew what foods to eat to be healthy and what herbs to take if we become sick to make us better. And I think, again, we all have that inside of us. So it's really important to be able to tap into that intuition, as well as educating ourselves with the resources that we have these days and knowing what foods are going to be healthiest for us. I think that it can be really simple. Sometimes we overcomplicate things.
Absolutely. Have to agree there.
Yes. It can't, we can make it really complicated, but one of the first things I do is to, go back to the beginning and start with the gut. Very first mentor loved to say that, start with the gut. No matter what the issue is, no matter what the symptoms, start with the gut, because number one, you are what you eat. But number two, if your gut is not functioning properly, if you're not digesting the foods you eat and you're not assimilating them, then it doesn't matter how healthy your diet is. If you're not assimilating it, then your body can't utilize it. And it's just going to go right through you. So starting with the gut, starting with whole foods, not processed or packaged,
Yes.
Organic foods, so that your body's not having to detox all of the pesticides and herbicides, and that you're getting the most nutrients out of those foods. Making sure you're eating lots and lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. And I don't believe that there's any one best diet for everybody, because we are very unique and individual. And
Definitely.
I think everybody needs to be able to use their own intuition to know what foods are best for them. But in general, I think everybody needs to be eating a lot more vegetables.
Definitely.
And I think a good rule of thumb is, every meal you have, make sure that 50% of it at least are vegetables.
Yes.
And making sure that they're in as whole a form as possible, the least processed as possible, making sure you're eating healthy nuts and seeds as well. I think some people do better when they are eating meat. For instance, I'm a vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian for almost 30 years. That's what my body tells me is the best diet for me. I'm not vegan, but I am vegetarian. So I think a lot of people are more healthy when they're eating a lot more vegetables and fruits and nuts and seeds. And if you are a person who really does need to have some meat, making sure that it is organic. It's so important for any animal foods that you eat to be organic, even if you can't buy all your food organic, because those chemicals in the pesticides and herbicides, they bioaccumulate in fat, in animal fat. So any of those chemicals that the animals are eating are going to be stored in the fat. And then when you eat it, it's going to be stored in your fat, and it's going to throw off your hormones. And that's going to make the menopausal shift a lot harder for your liver to detox. Your hormones are shifting anyway. Your liver has a lot more work to do, because your liver not only detoxes chemicals or toxins that come into your body, but it also metabolizes your hormones. If you have a lot of stress, which is what happens in midlife when all of these changes are happening, your liver is working harder and harder and harder. That's the second key, is not only, eating really good foods, really clean, healthy, lots of vegetables, organic, but then supporting your liver. And you can do that, with food. You can do it with herbs, making sure that you're really taking care of your digestion. Probiotics are another really great way to make sure that your gut is healthy and that you have a good microbiome going on there. There's been some recent research that part of our gut microbiome is called gastrobiome. Okay. And it is specific in metabolizing estrogen. And so during perimenopause and menopause, when our estrogen levels are fluctuating, part of our gut flora helps to balance that out. So if we don't have a good gut flora, then we're going to have more issues with our hormones and having symptoms because of those fluctuations. A clean, healthy diet, supporting the liver, and making sure we have a good gut flora with lots of probiotics in our diet.
Definitely. I think you've covered some of these points with the healthy eating and the healthy diet, but how can women take ownership of their health?
That's a great question. And I love that question, because that's probably the thing that I'm most passionate about, is that women feel confident to take ownership and responsibility for their health, and not feel like they're dependent on a doctor that they may not be able to get in to see for weeks or months, or a prescription that they may not be able to fill. or somebody else outside themselves. And so for me, this goes back to tapping into that inner healer, connecting with your intuition so that you can know exactly what you need for your own health, whether that is reaching out and getting support from somebody else, whether that's finding a mentor, or whether that's doing some self-study on your own. Tapping into yourself so that you hear the messages your body's sending you.
Yes.
That's the number one way that you can take ownership of your health, is to be able to be still enough to listen to what your body's saying to you, because your body is talking to you. Your body's talking to you all the time. It's sending you messages. We oftentimes just don't even hear those messages, or we ignore them. You know, if we have a headache, what do? We take a pill to make the headache go away. Well, the headache was there for a reason.
Absolutely. Telling us something.
The pill that we took just put a Band-Aid over it, but it didn't address the underlying cause of the headache. If our periods are becoming really heavy and painful, we can take medication to soothe that. But again, that's not addressing what's going on. If we're having hot flashes or insomnia, again, we can put Band-Aids on those. But those are messages that our body's sending us to say, hey, there's something going on here that you need to address. And so if we can tap into that, our intuition can lead us to finding those root causes so that we can address them. Definitely. And yes, sometimes it's important to have that support from outside. Definitely, again, I think that that's number one, is having support. Yes. Whether that's from a healthcare practitioner, some kind of a natural health mentor, or from friends and family. You need the education, you need the tools, but you need to be able to listen to those messages first so that you know what needs to be addressed.
So which natural remedies can support energy, stress reduction, and radiant health?
That's great, because I love bringing up stress reduction for women in midlife, because what a lot of women don't realize, you hear a lot about how your estrogen and progesterone levels are changing during the menopausal phase. And so we really focus on those hormones. But those are minor hormones. Cortisol is a master hormone that has effects on all of the minor hormones. So we can try to address things down here, but it's really the cortisol that is making the big difference.
Definitely.
And because we have so much stress going on internally and externally during this phase of life, usually our cortisol levels are really high. And as you know, cortisol is the stress hormone. So when we have high levels of cortisol, that's going to affect our estrogen and progesterone. If we address the cortisol, then that will balance everything else out. So that's what we need to focus on the most during this menopausal phase over the long term, is how can we reduce cortisol? How can we use stress reduction to help us feel more energized, to help us sleep better, to start reducing all of the symptoms we might be feeling? So stress reduction is the key here. And we can do that through the diet, as we talked about. We can do it through herbal medicine. One category of herbs that are really important here are adaptogens. Adaptogens help our body adapt to stress. Looking to the herbal adaptogens can be really key, and there are many different kinds of adaptogens and again, it needs to be personalized because we're all unique. Finding an herbal adaptogen that's right for you can really make a huge difference. Again, focusing on the liver, because the liver has to process all of that cortisol that's going through our bodies. You can, again, look to herbs. You can do dandelion or nettle or burdock or any of these really good liver herbs. We can look to meditation. We have so much scientific research about how wonderful meditation is in reducing cortisol and reducing stress in our lives. And there's so many different ways we can meditate. Again, that's kind of a personal thing. For some people, just taking a walk in nature every day, even if it's just 5 minutes, can be enough. To have a regular visualization, or it could be listening to soothing music. It could be lighting a candle. It can be, doing an intention exercise on staying focused in the present moment, or, there's so many different forms of meditation. All of these things together can really help to reduce the stress, which then will relieve the other symptoms that you might be experiencing.
And my next question, I think you've just covered a lot of it, was what resources do you recommend, daily tips, tools for women and their supportive partners going through the menopause?
Right. Yes. And yes, all of those things that I mentioned are wonderful things. One of the things that I work with my clients on around putting all of these things in place in your life is to make them into rituals. Because when we have a list of all these things that we need to be doing, it starts to feel like work. It starts to feel like, oh, I have to change my diet, and I have to use herbs, and I have to start meditating, and that can actually add more stress. Help discern like which of these things are most important for you, which of these things feel best for you, are best for your body and your situation, and let's put them together in a way that feels really nourishing, that feels really lovely, that you actually look forward to doing these things every day. And it doesn't feel like a chore. It feels like something you get to do for yourself, including the things that you really love to do every day. Some women, it might be a nice, relaxing aromatherapy bath in the evening while they make their evening tea, herbal tea, or while they take a remedy specifically for them, and they settle in and do a nightly meditation and light a candle. Or for some women, it might be that they go out walking in nature and that they spend time just being in that moment and being grateful for, all of the things that they have. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can individualize it, but making it something that you look forward to and feels like a really wonderful, luscious self-care practice.
Definitely. I feel soothed just listening to all of that. It sounds wonderful. Seriously.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what we want. We want it to sound so wonderful that we can't wait to do it every day.
So where can the listeners find you online, and what's your website?
Okay, thanks for asking. I have a website, and it is called herbsofgracehealingarts.com. And I also have a thriving Facebook group called You Can Feel Marvelous in Midlife Naturally. So people can get a hold of me at either place. And on my website, I have a free gift for women. It's a checklist. It's called Goodbye Hot Flashes, Insomnia, and Brain Fog. And it's just a simple list of things that you can do to help to address some of those symptoms that you might be experiencing during menopause.
And I'll have all the links in the show notes so people can actually go straight to that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your courageous journey with us today. And by doing so, you have helped so many other women and their supportive partners going through the menopause. Vanessa Nixon.
I really enjoyed our talk. It was fabulous. Thank you.
What is your definition of courage? Because we're all about Create the Courage to be Fearless podcast here. So what is your definition of courage?
My definition of courage is being able to see what needs to be done. And even if it's scary, finding a way to do it in a way that is in alignment. This is a really courageous time in a woman's life. It takes a lot of courage to walk into that initiation, aware and conscious, knowing that parts of it are going to be really hard, but that it's all worth it. And there are so many rewards when you come out the other side. If there's something that needs to be done in your life and it's a little scary, just finding a way to get in alignment with doing it and having the courage, having the bravery to just go ahead and do it and make sure that whatever that thing is, that it's done for you or somebody else in your life or for the world in general.